Hi guys, Andy here, making another video for you all, just to explain a few more things about the Subaru engine and why I build them this way. Also, it's not a video to make out I'm the best engine builder, and it certainly ain't a video to say that I'm better than other engine builders, and I'm not going to use fancy words to make it look like I know what I'm doing. So first of all, you start with your block. Now, as you've probably heard, there's so many Subaru engine blocks out there. Open deck block, semi-closed deck block, closed deck inserted. For me, the best block to start with is by far an OEM closed deck block, EJ20 or EJ22. Well aged, so made from 93 to 96. So it's well aged, an OEM type, not a closed deck insert. This come out the factory like this. And then that's the greatest starting point for any big power build. Only thing you have to take into consideration is all engine blocks built from these years were centre thrust. So you do have to do a rear thrust conversion. Once that's done, you can start with the good stuff. So your block's done, you've cleaned it, you've made sure it's as clean as you can possibly get it. Put it to one side and you choose your piston. In this build, I've gone for JE Ultras. Custom's going for about 550, 600 brake. So he needs a good, reliable engine. Once you've got your piston, measurement. Once you've got your measurement, you know what you're going to bore the block to. Clearance wise, we went about 3.5 thou on this block. I think for road use, fast road use, the boost we're going to be using, you could use up to 4 thou. You could even use for race engines up to 5 thou clearance. But I like an engine that isn't necessarily sounds like a bag of spanners and isn't exactly an electric motor, but it's quiet enough so that it doesn't sound, oh, what's that problem? There is no problem. All it is your pistons need to expand and get hot. So I try and use, a clearance that customers are going to be happy with. So once I've got that, got my piston measurement, I've bored to the clearance I want, I've honed it, I've refaced, I've done my rear thrust conversion. Key is good quality machining. This is an absolutely crucial part of any engine build. With this build, we're doing a 14mm head stud conversion. So, because we're using above, say, 1.6 bar of boost, generally at that point I would go to a 14mm head stud. Anything below that, if you use a good quality 11mm head stud, something like the RCM Extreme, you'd be okay. But as we're using a bit more boost than that, go 14mm head stud. Next thing is ring gaps. So once you've got your rings, of course these are all done, but you need to check them. Ring in, bang, push with a piston, feeler gauge, measure. If it's not the correct measurement, best way is a ring filer, manual one like this, do the job fine. Or you can use an electric one, which I prefer to use because you get a much better finish, much more accuracy. You can even measure so you know exactly how much you're taking off. There's no accidentally over filing them and having the wrong ring gaps. It's much more precise. 4, 2, 1, 3. Mark your pistons, do your rings like so. Now, when I was talking about how crucial the machining of the block is, and I do stress how crucial the machining is, there's many ways that people machine, and you know, I'm not saying any of them are right or wrong, but the way I like to do it is essentially with what's called a torque plate or dummy head. Now the reason I use a dummy head is for one reason really, is just to get the most accurate bore and hone you can. Essentially all a torque plate does is, as the term dummy head suggests, is it just imitates the head being bolted to the block. When the torque plate is bolted to the block, what it allows or doesn't allow is movement or flex of the liner. So essentially you're machining it so that it doesn't pot belly like myself. If this is really exaggerated, but if you can imagine, as you go down the bore, so you start at the top where there's plenty of support, as you go down the bore, if it's not torque plated down, you can get it flex and into the middle and then down to the bottom where there's support again. Also, when you bolt the torque plate to it, there is an element of movement, very, very small. So what the torque plate does, or dummy head does, is bolt it to the block so that when you machine, it's absolutely where it should be, so that when you do marry your heads to the block, you know that it's absolutely bang on. You don't have to machine with a torque plate at all. I mean, any good machinist, to be honest, can machine without a torque plate and pretty much get it bang on. But for me, I prefer to use a torque plate. You bolt it down like so, and for what, 15 minutes extra, you can make sure that it's perfect. Well-aged block, I hear you cry. When you're machining these blocks, the older blocks, so very early ones, you know, early to late 90s, when you're machining them, the material definitely is harder for whatever reason, probably better quality metal than some of the later blocks. Some of the later blocks, for example, like the thick walled block, it is, when machining it, it's like butter compared to these good old solid blocks. So that's why I like to use a well-aged OEM block. Right, we're now on to the next stage of the build, which essentially is another crucial part. Make sure your hands are clean, make sure your sides are clean. Cleanliness is the key. Now, you've weighed your rods. I suggest you weigh your rods, your pistons, write down everything. Make sure that you've got, I like to use a data sheet. So as you're going along, I'm writing down each individual thing, I'm writing down, so you can always go back to it, you can always check it, and that's how you get everything bang on. You've got your crank in this engine, obviously, because it's going to a 2.1. We are using the later 79mm crank, hence why we had to do a rear thrust conversion. If we were keeping the block 2 litre, we could have used an early centre thrust crank, as long as we could find a good one. Nowadays, rear thrusting is the best way because you can only get rear thrust cranks. Weigh your rods, weigh your pistons, make sure that you get your cylinders 1, 2, 3 and 4 nicely balanced. Check clearances. So get your block, put your bearings in, put your crank in. I recommend using a plastic gauge, like so. Once you've plastic gauged, so all your journals, you've put the block together, you put your crank inside, all your bearings are in, you've torqued it down, you pull it all back apart, make sure you use your plastic gauge to gauge what it is. Generally I like to go around 2 thou. Now, you The thing about certainly used blocks is you'll certainly find most of the time on Journal 4, I find on the Subaru block, that you generally have to use different size bearings, like a mix of bearings. Now, in the past I've had to use HXs, H's, Kings, ACL, Clavite, even OEM bearings, and it's a bit of a mixture, but I prefer to have, rather than just sticking in a set of bearings, and they could be anything from 1.5 thou to 2.5 thou. Some might be 2 thou, because it's just a set of bearings. What I prefer to do is I'll have a mixture of bearings, and I'll use ACL, ACLH, ACLHX, OEM or King, and I'll literally do it from the measurement. So as long as anywhere, I'd rather have anywhere around 2 thou. I think any tighter is just way too tight, and if it's any looser than say 1.5 thou, then it's just gonna spin eventually, and that's when you get bottom end failure. So just quick recap: we've cleaned everything, we've weighed everything, we've measured everything. We're now happy that we've got our weights, our measurements, we've balanced right. We can now assemble. So now we're ready to put the rods to the crank. We've put the bearings in, we've measured the bearings, clearances are fine, we're happy with that. So now we're going to do the rods to the crank. So another crucial stage: make sure your hands are clean, your sides are clean. We've put our lubrication on our rod bolts. We're about to put the lubrication on our bearings. Now, if you can imagine, you don't want to cross-contaminate these lubrications. They're two very different lubrications. So what I like to do is quite simply use my 2 fingers on there, pinky, and that stops cross-contamination. Always have blue roll to hand to wipe your hands afterwards. You want to make sure the bearing is completely coated, so you don't want anywhere to not have any lube at all. The reason I use these fingers is this is an extremely sticky lubrication. All it would take is certainly something that isn't magnetic, like a bit of grit or something, sand. The worst thing is actually like the soda, it's found in soda blasting, because you can't feel it to touch, and it getting stuck to the bottle as you squeeze it. And then imagine you pull away, it's now on your fingers, and then you wipe it onto your bearing. It sounds excessive, but it's all these little things that if you make sure that you do them and do them properly, that engine will last as long as possible. Next stage, make sure all my rods are numbered, or my pistons are numbered. So I'm going to go in order from 4 to 1. I like to face, there's no real, this is just the way I like to build the engine. There's no real reason why, it's just I like to do it this way. So I like to face the crank away from me. 4 first, tang down, in, tang down, I like to feel that if you set everything up right in front of you correctly, it makes your life a lot easier when you come to assemble too. So just be organised. Make sure that you know where everything is and how you're going to do it. Even if you spend a couple of minutes thinking before and you make a plan of how you're going to assemble, it just makes it so much easier. Right. Now, quarter turn top, quarter turn bottom. Top to bottom, like I said, to make sure that bearing clamps nice and evenly. Once you've nipped up, just make sure you are nipped up nicely. Happy with that? Quick feel, perfect. On to the next one. Again, hang down. Hand tight first, then get your ratchet, quarter turn top, quarter turn bottom, quarter turn top, quarter turn bottom. Number 2. Hand tight. So they're now hand tight, and now this is the bit where I want the bearing to come evenly together so you have the best clamp possible. You don't want the bearing to end up skew-iff. Check. I mean, when I say check, I mean if there's a problem, you won't be able to move it, or if it's too loose, you know there's a problem. What I'm saying is, I measured, I'm happy, but you need to make sure that there's no. See, sometimes you can put too much lube onto the bolts, or I have known people that have problems just because they haven't been clean enough, and then they bolt it on, and then it's solid. And I strip it down and I find that it's quite simple, just either too much lube and have they pushed in. I also like to hold it like this as I'm doing it, purely because I don't like any sort of movement while I'm clamping up. The reason I don't want any movement is I just want that bearing to clamp flush, like I said before. Right, done. Next stage, torque wrench, good quality torque wrench. It doesn't have to be digital. So now top to bottom, top 20 foot-pound, bottom 20 foot-pound, up to 30, top 30 foot-pound, bottom 30 foot-pound, now up to 40 foot-pound, £40. So from the measurement we had took before, it's time to measure again. Right, when you got to this stage, prepped your block, you've done your pistons and pistons rings, you've done your crank, your bearings and your rods. Next stage. Now first of all, you need a soft surface to put the block down onto, face down. The reason you need a soft surface is, if you can imagine putting a freshly machined face down onto metal surface, could be a wood surface. Wood would be better, but it'd be softer, but I don't like the cleanliness of wood. So I essentially, piece of cardboard with a silicone, it's a baking mat actually, that I cut in half. This I put the block faces down onto, and it just stops any sort of scratching, unnecessary scratching or damage to the faces, because that's the last thing you want to get a good head gasket seal. And once you get to this point, this is where some people would instantly think bang, bang, bang with something like a dead blow hammer. That's a big mistake. You could move bearings as you're banging it, and that could be catastrophic. Get yourself some brand new bolts and use the force of these four to bring the block slowly together. And to 18, and then finally it should be 28.9. Let's go to 29. Check. I can turn it over by hand. All good. Now, get in your silicone mat. In my case, we need the block back on its side. We're at the stage where we've got the block together. I can turn it over by hand. I'm more than happy at this stage. So next stage is getting the pistons in. Now this is a crucial stage. So if you can imagine, not getting this right could cause oil to get past your oil scraper rings, the compression to be down because you just haven't got the seal there on rings 1 and 2. And generally it's just, if you want to make good power, this is absolutely crucial. Now there's two types of ring slips. There's the traditional type, which probably back in the day when your granddad was servicing his Morris Minor, during the winter he'd change his piston rings, he'd probably use a tin of beans and a Jubilee clip. That's essentially the same thing, which I personally still use today, still enjoy using. But if you really can, use a Bore Pacific piston ring slip, because this just makes life so much easier and doesn't eradicate the chance of you, I don't know, bending a ring or whatever, but you've got to be doing something extremely wrong to bend a ring using one. So first I'm going to get the block prepped. So a little bit of oil. I use good quality mineral oil. You don't want too much oil. Check your crank. Is where you need to be. So I'm going to start with number 4. So make sure you've got the small end of the rod exactly where you need it to get your gudgeon pin in. Make sure it's perfectly in line, because with the boxer engine this is probably the one thing that is a little bit fiddly and has got to be right. You've already done your piston rings, you've already numbered your pistons, so you know exactly which rings and which piston is going into which bore. Now, piston ring gap. Our friends over the pond really do use huge amounts of boost, and their ring gaps are, I think, considerably bigger than ours, because in little old Britain we basically haven't got the roads to to even drive these fast cars. But the reason I prefer to use a tighter ring clearance is essentially so that you lose as little compression as possible, because building a quick car, or a car that, or an engine, let's say building an engine that to its maximum potential is all about flow. And how does it flow start to finish? How quickly can you get them gases in, get the gases out, and how efficiently does that engine work? Each little thing, no matter how small it is, the little things all add up. And to me, I like to use slightly tighter ring clearances so that I don't lose compression. Check your circlip. So with the J Ultra, they do have the nitrile circlip. So if we're number 4, we need the left hand circlip in so that we can get the gudgeon pin from the right hand side. Piston in, check that you're all happy, check that the rings are where they should be. Check the pistons in line. Many ways you can do this. I like my middle size dead blow hammer because it's a nice weight. So get the piston where you need it. And it's simple as that. You shouldn't, if you're there having to really pound on it, then there's something really wrong. Do not force that piston in, because you're gonna bend your oil scraper rings or damage your ring in some way if it does go in, and then you're gonna have problems. So I've made sure all my circlips are in, and the reason I make sure they're in is because if one circlip is slightly out and that comes out, that can cause an absolute colossal engine failure. Worst of all being the gudgeon pin actually comes out, and if it slots into here Say if the engine stops at exactly the right place and the gudgeon pin slides out and lands in one of these gudgeon pin holes, can you imagine trying to get that stripped to rebuild it? So yes, make sure that your circlip's in. Now at this stage in the build, I'm going to go around and check absolutely everything using my data sheet. I'm going to go check every bolt, circlip, I'm going to turn the engine over, make sure it's doing everything that it should be. Okay, now to the next stage. I'm going to seal everything up using all OEM seals. The one thing I do change is the oil separation bolts. Generally replace them all with the HT type bolt, which is like so, over the normal bolt. I just think it adds that little bit of extra protection. So I've got my bolts ready, I've got my oil separation plate ready, got my gudgeon pin hole bolts ready, I've got my diamond gudgeon pin cover ready, I've got my seals ready. So now I will get a bit of 3-bond. Again, the last thing you want is an oil leak after you've fitted the engine. And then mark. You're marking as you go along so that you always know that every bolt has been torqued. Tiny bit of 3-bond on the back of here. Again, because you don't want an oil leak. That's the last thing. You don't mind, you understand, you always have teething issues when you build a big power build. But the last thing you want is an oil leak in a really awkward place. Now these, when you're using bolt heads like this, I don't like to torque them down as heavy as they suggest. So I prefer to do this one by hand, purely because if you can imagine, if you're the poor person that has to take them back out for whatever reason it is, I constantly struggle and generally end up having to drill these out if someone completely over torques them, especially with torque and angle settings. It's very common for them to be ridiculously tight if someone hasn't done it correctly. So I prefer to use my own personal feel on that one, so that I know it's tight enough, but it will come out if need be. Oil separator plate, really another one that needs to be done right, because this would be so annoying if this leaked now after fitting and this leaked. Essentially we've got to pull the gearbox out or the engine out to get to it. So this bit does have to, for 2 extra minutes, using a bit of brake cleaner, just cleaning the surfaces, making sure that 3-bond, I've already used I use like a little Dremel or something to clean up the surface, make sure there's absolutely nothing there, make sure it's clean. Most of all, make sure the threads are all good. Then, quite simply, nice even layer of 3-bond. All the way around, making sure you don't miss anywhere and there's no gaps in between the 3-bond. Like I said, 2 absolutely clean surfaces. There's a whole debate on OEM pump to high pressure pump, high flow pump. Now, the earlier oil pumps made by Subaru were lower pressure than the later ones, so I like to use the later type oil pump because I don't want high pressure. I'd rather have a high flow, and the only modification I like to do to my oil pumps is the pressure relief valve. By smoothing that off, you will allow it to glide better and less chance of it seizing and failing or jamming. So I like to go for, in this case we're going 11mm with the oil pressure relief valve mod. Apart from that, it's OEM pressure. So yeah, brand new bolts. Again, clean your surfaces, that is key. Brake cleaner, I've already prepped it with the Dremel type surface. You'll get, no doubt, 3-bond, so I like to prep the surface with a sharp razor just by cutting it away. So it gives you a nice lovely seal when you put fresh 3-bond on. Send a bit more to the top there, clean. So I'm now happy the surfaces are fine. I will now go around the back of the oil pump, getting all traces of oil away from the surface. Brand new OEM seal. 3-bond. Again, identical to the oil separation plate. A nice even layer of 3-bond. Nice even layer. Make sure oil pump's aligned. Slips in. It's pushed on as far as I can go now. So again, in sequence, just by hand at first, carefully draw the oil pump using the bolts down to the block. Just carefully, bit by bit. So I want you to go just gently to 2 foot-pound first. Once you're happy, mark so you know you've torqued them all. And there you go. Front seal, oil. The key to putting a seal in is you couldn't get proper tools to do it, but I like to just gently all the way around, gently watching it go round, around, 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 like so. So there you go, guys, just a quick video on how to build a Subaru short block. I hope it's been helpful to you all. I quite enjoyed filming it, to be honest. Next will be some videos on, we'll do the oil pump, we'll do the heads, and I've even bought a really rundown Hawkeye STI, which I'll probably video doing up, getting back to full health. Probably tune it to like a 450 brake for a fast road setup with a forged closed deck EJ25. So stay tuned.